Welcome to the Light Cellar podcast, brought to you by Light Cellar, a place where you can learn to find and craft your own food and medicine. In this interview series, you will meet a range of characters in the health and wellness space that are bringing light to your everyday. You'll hear from a number of different experts on a wide variety of topics. We have several different series within the podcast, including our Wild Wisdom and Storytelling with Blaine Andrusek, the Rays of Light, inspiring wellness in the community, plus solo casts, Q&As, and other topics for you to enjoy. You can find this as a video version, as well as the audio on any of your favorite platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody you know who will benefit. You can also shop online at lightcellar.ca. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Another episode.
We've survived a cold blast.
Yeah.
And cheeks are okay.
Yeah. The cold lingers, not as deep of a freeze, but we got a nice fire roaring behind us. That's feeling good. Hope you guys stayed warm. And yeah, I enjoyed, we talked about this on the way over. You know, it's okay to kind of have one of these deep freezes. Chill out. Right? I know for me, the shop was a little bit quieter, so I kind of was more working from home, and just had a nice time with family inside by the fire, nice hot drinks, that kind of thing. And I always welcome the cold because we've had an unusually warm winter so far, El Nino they're calling it. And, there's an ecological function to the cold, kill off all those bugs and that type of thing. I think for the pine beetle, they say you need a good stretch of so many days at, minus such and such.
Yep.
And so I welcome it. Let's have it. Let's really just fully embrace winter and go for it for a few days.
I have memories when I was quite young of walking to school with so many scarves on, you could barely walk. Like the Pillsbury Doughboy kind of wah, wah.
Did you walk uphill both ways too? Or?
Of course, yes. Yes, no, I think that's something our grandparents only did.
Right, yeah.
It was exclusive to the early 1900s. that Hills did that, yeah.
For sure.
Like a teeter-totter.
Yeah. Okay, well, awesome. We got some ideas we're going to kind of flow into, and I'm sure many more will come in. We actually did want to talk about the cold, particularly frostbite. We're also going to talk about stimulants, circulatory stimulants, and the nature of their dual action on the cardiovascular system. We were going to just mention a little something from our last convo, and then I can't remember what else there was. Anyways, well, it'll all come out. It'll be a good flow today.
It was absolutely stupid and embarrassing for both of us that we couldn't remember the word pyloric valve.
It was like ileocecal valve.
Or pylorus. I mean,
yeah.
And I've told that story at least 5,000 times, and I don't have to think about remembering anything. It just rolls off my lips. But for some reason, on camera, I just froze.
Yeah.
It was just the weirdest thing.
Yeah,
anyway.
And with your mind frozen, my mind was freezing, and it was like, okay.
Maybe it had something to do with the weather change.
Yeah. There we are.
Mind freeze.
Yeah.
There it is.
There was a comment, that kind of clarified it down below in that video. Okay, here's the valves, appreciate that, and of course it all came back to us as soon as we stopped record. And
then just a reminder that every time the pyloric valves open with a squirt of that acid mix of chewed food, a little squirt comes from your pancreas, because the collective pancreatic enzymes are very alkaline, and it neutralizes that. Otherwise, your own juices, and this can happen, start digesting the duodenum, which is the start of the small intestine. You can have an ulcer there.
Yeah.
So that's all coordinated with and coming with the pancreatic blast comes a little burst from the liver as well.
Right.
So you're getting pancreatic enzymes and bile from the liver, and then you have a mix that not all nutrients, but most nutrients get absorbed at different sites along the way through the small intestine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, enough of that.
Cool.
I thought we were talking about New Year's resolutions, and it came to me about one for a lot of people is quitting smoking. And I've helped a lot of people with a couple of things. There's a herb called Lobelia, And it's worth having around, especially if you have a cottage on a lake, and occasionally it seems to be particular to children more than adults, get what's called swimmer's ear, where from swimming you end up, maybe your ears were a bit waxy, and you get lake water in there under, and you just go, you can't get the water out.
Yeah.
And that can turn into an infection depending on the lake water.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure exactly how this works, but Lobelia tincture, if you just lay over and put a few drops in the ear, and I always say to parents, well, if you're doing this for your child and you put it in this ear and the tincture starts running out the other ear, just get a new child, because that's probably not fixable. But if you have to go back to work or whatever, you can put a cotton ball in there to let it soak for a while.
Right.
But I remember doing that once on the ferry coming back from Vancouver Island, and I got out of the wind behind one of the big, I was going to say chimney, whatever, the big exhaust pipes. They're quite large, and I laid there in a nice sunny spot, just a nice cozy out of the wind, and just laid there for a while with my head on my rain jacket and let it soak, and that was over in a couple of minutes.
Huh. So what's it doing there? Like it's removing the water, or it's preventing infection to form?
That's just it. I'm not certain if it might even be just that it's tincture and the alcohol dissolves any wax.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Yeah.
But Lobelia is known as, you hear us talking about the nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, that's the stuff that runs automatically. So you've got things that happen without you thinking about it or being aware of it every day of your life, every minute of your life. And there's two opposing sides called the sympathetic and parasympathetic. And what happens, the sympathetic is the reaction to something, like all of a sudden, there's a tiger in your face! And so everything shifts to go, holy shit, there's a tiger in my face, do I run or fight, or what do I do?
Yeah.
And then the parasympathetic is the one that comes along and say, no, it's a stuffy. It's just a stuffed toy. Relax. So it's the one that counterbalances.
Yeah.
And so depending on what your needs are, those two opposing forces work to keep you in balance.
Yeah.
And Lobelia is regarded as kind of the king of the balancing agent.
Oh, okay.
So it's used historically, worldwide, it's been used to help with asthma, for example.
Right.
Used a lot in respiratory blends, and quite often taken as a tea, or you could use tincture. So for quick use, I think it's worth, if you have, like I said, a lakefront property and children, I would have some tincture around because of the ear thing. But it's also in a strong cup of tea or tincture straight up a sip, it's a very powerful emetic. So if you suddenly feel really nauseous and you get thinking about that leftover shrimp sandwich that you had in the fridge that was 2 weeks old, and maybe you should get rid of it, you have a little shot, and you better be standing at the sink because it works fast. If you need to throw up, you have a shot of Lobelia tincture and like 1 minute and you're going to puke.
Wow.
Yet, if you don't need to throw up, it won't make you throw up.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And on the topic of tobacco, I mean, that is a major purgative. Like if you swallow that, like.
Well, there's a chemical that's, I think that's the alkaloid group, that's almost, and officially it is, a withdrawal drug for nicotine.
Right.
So if you're trying to quit smoking and you get to one of those, I gotta have one.
Yeah.
A few drops of Lobelia tincture will end that.
Right.
Or if you have time in a relaxed state like this to put the kettle on, you could have a cup of tea as well.
Oh, that's
and
great.
just forget the whole thing. So
And my understanding is it's lobeline is one of the compounds that fits into the nicotine receptor sites. So it's kind of you're getting a satiety
well,
that way.
Yeah, it's an official withdrawal. Yep.
Yeah, amazing.
Substance. Yep.
And Lobelia, I've grown Lobelia.
Yep.
Is that the same stuff? Like you buy at the garden store? And it comes in
I
different
don't think
flowers?
so.
Yeah, I've always doubted that, despite, okay, it says Lobelia, but as you know, common names,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The plant look is quite a bit different.
Right.
The flowers look the same, but I don't think the little hanging basket stuff that we buy
Right.
is medicinal.
Yeah.
The other, it was often referred to as Indian tobacco
Right.
or pukeweed
Oh, wow.
because of, of the purgative action.
Yeah.
And I think it was one that our First Nation friends used if they had been smoking too much other things.
Right.
Like if there was a lot of ceremony and the pipe went around too many times,
Yeah.
you had a sore throat and that sort of thing, they would smoke a little bit of lobelia and it would just, like again, back to the asthma reference,
Right.
it would calm everything down.
So that's something that grows indigenously here to North America?
Pretty much continent-wide, yes.
Right, wow.
And apparently we export it all over the world.
Really? Okay, so in all my wild foraging adventures, that's one I've yet to meet in the wild.
I've only photographed it once, and it was in a boggy area.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it only grows in boggy areas. But I think...
Right. Yeah, but it's not in Kananaskis, is it, per se? Or
It might be.
Might be. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this will be a new one for me to keep my eyes out for. I've definitely been familiar with the herb. One strategy, if ever somebody comes into the store, they're like, I'm really looking to kind of eliminate or reduce smoking, Harmonic Arts. They make a great smoke blend. In that term, smoking, traditionally could have been just aromatically, right? To smoke a herb as in, the frankincense and the myrrh down the aisle of the church or whatever, right? Like there's a power in aromatically smoking a herb into a room, but then there's also kind of more direct ingestion into the mouth in the case of a cigar or into the lungs in the case of a cigarette is all I'll recommend. Like, okay, you can either go cold turkey and just start with this, because a lot of it is a habit, right? In terms of there's definitely a chemical, dependency, and hence what you said about the withdrawal and the lobeline and that really, really being helpful. But sometimes it's just like, it's like, I want my break, like they're at work and there's a real ritual to that. So it's like, okay, how about you shift, what you're smoking? And it could be a 90-10, 80-20, 50-50, 30-70, you kind of like bring down the level of tobacco by adding in these other herbs. And it could just be purely lobelia, or it could be a number of other herbs that are added in.
Well, and real tobacco, such as our Indigenous friends used, isn't even that bad for you.
No, totally.
The real problem with
ingredient with
a
that.
pack of just I got laughing one day because I'd never thought of it as a child. My father used to smoke about 2 packs a day.
Yeah.
And his brand was called Craven A.
Right.
Like
you a Craven A?
It's known as the Craven Foundation, right? The company itself.
Yeah.
So if somebody said, "Hey, John, you want to have a smoke?" and he said, "Well, yeah, I'm Craven A," and pull out his, it's in your face.
Yeah.
Every time you have one.
Totally. Yeah, I mean that's a curious thought. I mean, I 100% agree. Like tobacco it's a sacred herb, and I don't label it as inherently bad. I think it has a role to play. It can be a medicinal, very powerful herb. It's playing with fire because it's literally one of the most addictive substances, the nicotine in it.
Yep.
But what we have today is a far cry from just naturally
apparently
grown tobacco.
Today's tobacco is full of chemicals, even just so that it burns better.
No, totally.
That sort of thing.
And then there's the paper, and there's the filter, and there's all these like really harmful things. Whereas, I mean, how long did the campaign go on for to really beat smoking out of society where everybody used to smoke? Like it was, and I'm not saying maybe that's a good thing or we should go back to that.
Yeah, you watch movies from the 50s and
right? Yeah. And slowly, the cigarette changed from what it used to be, and it wasn't just smoked; it was chewed. It was, all these different ways of consuming it, and unfortunately, it's become so bastardized. Now there are some sources, like because personally, like I know friends are like, this is a more natural cigarette, and I'm like, it's still a cigarette. I see the filter, I see those bleach papers, like American Spirit, I don't buy it. Like drum tobacco, I don't buy it. But if you go to, there's a website called Leaf Only, and they're based out of the States, and you can get all these different varieties. They're grown in different regions and cured different ways, and just 100% natural. You can even get certified organic. And
I remember a few friends all the way back to high school that were smoking, I think they were from India maybe, or something called beedies. Do you remember those?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, for
sure. They were like little cigars.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And other herbs were mixed with it too, right? Which the only thing that really survived, the herbal additions to cigarettes were menthol, right?
Right. We called them peppermints.
Yeah, like that's a harken back to, it was tobacco and there was always that combination of different herbs.
At my worst days, I carried it was an Army surplus shoulder bag that was my purse before it was fashionable for men to carry purses. But I was, among other things, a pipe smoker.
Yeah.
And on any given Tuesday, there was probably about 11 different things, not all of them legal, to smoke in that bag. So I'd have some Players cigarettes. I've had some we called them peppermints.
Yeah.
Some whatever those little cigars were called, cigarillos.
Right.
And maybe a real cigar.
Right.
And then at least 2 pipes. With at least 1 tobacco blend for the pipes.
Right.
And yeah.
So you were really into it then.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
I just had a flash. I haven't thought of this in years. Do you know a singer called John Prine?
Oh yeah, for sure.
One of his big hits was, what was his name? Stone. Came home. I'm just going to say John. John Stone came home to the wife and family after serving in the conflict overseas. The time that he served had shattered all his nerves and left a little shrapnel in his knee. Do you remember that song?
No, but I know him.
It was all about Vietnam, right?
Right, yeah.
And he had a really raspy voice, which I understood perfectly when I saw him live, because in the entire performance, he had a cigarette in the ashtray, one in his mouth, and one in the end of the guitar where you can kind of fit the cigarette in the end of the strings, however that works at the machine head.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, well, that's where the raspy voice comes from.
Yeah.
And then I was at some sort of conference with the Respiratory Society or some such title. And we had some presenters, and they had one of these cameras with fiber optics where they would shove a fiber optic up your nose so that it came down looking at your vocal cords.
Right.
And then they shot a whole bunch of us from the group.
Yeah.
And this one gal that was in the group was a cocktail waitress, and from working in smoky bars and yelling a lot, her vocal cords, which should be perfectly smooth, like somebody had perfect vocal cords and they're nice and smooth and they sit there and they vibrate and that's all nice. And hers were completely noduled.
Jeez.
They looked like they'd been dipped in gravel and spray painted kind of thing.
Right.
Because of all of that hoarse between breathing other people's smoke and Anyway, enough of that.
Well, I'm curious, what did it for you? What was the shift? How long did you smoke, and what was that transition? Was that experiment? You're like, oh gosh, I better quit this out, or?
No, I thought about it for as long as 2 years.
Right.
And back to New Year's resolutions.
Right.
I would think about it around my birthday.
Yeah.
And I would think about it at New Year's. And I was never quite ready, and then somehow just came the day, and I just quit. Mm-hmm. And so, a couple of things. Addictions like that are very personal.
Yeah.
Don't make it a game. People do this betting each other $20 with somebody at the office that if you have the first smoke, you got to give the other guy $20 or something like that.
Yeah.
Don't make it a game. It's all about yourself. So, like, when I quit, I didn't even tell my wife. I hadn't had a smoke for about 2 weeks, and after supper one night, and I was mostly a pipe smoker,
Yeah.
not cigarettes. I only got into cigarettes for a while when I was working in a body shop, and I couldn't really smoke a pipe.
Right.
But I could have a quick cigarette kind of thing on a break. But after dinner one night, she said, "Honey, have you quit smoking?" And I looked at her and I said, I think I have.
Wow.
And that weekend there was a company conference down in Vegas. We were going down for 5 days. And I thought, well, I'm really fussy about my pipe tobacco. There's only one brand that I smoke. It's hard to find.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to take my pipes, and I'll be drinking, because a lot of people just have to have a smoke when alcohol's around.
Yeah.
And if I can survive 3 or 4 days in Vegas without a smoke, then I've quit.
Right.
So the thing that I came to realize, it might have been suggested by, I think it was a presenter that we had at a company meeting, talking about positive mental attitudes and things like that, or what a lot of people today call affirmations, where if somebody says, "Hey Malcolm, you want to have a smoke?" and you say, "Sorry, thanks Blaine, but I'm quitting,"
Right.
or "I'm trying to quit," either of those statements is actually an affirmation that you are in fact a smoker.
Right.
So your brain is fighting because you just admitted you're a smoker. Otherwise, why would you be trying to quit? As opposed to just giggle. They just say, "What a silly idea. I don't smoke."
Right.
And
Yeah,
every
yeah.
time you do that,
Yeah.
you're supporting a positive affirmation that you don't smoke.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Oh, I
You
like
might
that.
even be able to say, "I used to be a smoker, but I don't anymore." And some people apparently need to do that in front of a mirror.
Right.
I never had to go that far,
Yeah.
but that's what really helped me a lot. And I did want to bring that up, was just the affirmation thing. You're not trying to quit. You're not going to quit. You aren't quitting. You just don't smoke. And I've helped hundreds of people. 3 different things: positive affirmations. If you're really hooked, using the withdrawal drug, which is Lobelia, because of the lobeline, as you mentioned, and you could just make a habit of the tea. So that would be the equivalent of Nicorette gum, I guess.
Yeah.
So you're having a replacement thing. And then there's a type of sage called Clary Sage, and I just want to, back to common names are so confusing. The wild sage that grows in Alberta, I think we have 23 species, is not at all related to the sage that you would use in the kitchen for a pasta sauce or on pizza or with a mushroom dish or something like that. That sage, dinner sage, garden sage, is in the mint family. And so they're not even related. The other sage is actually a first cousin to yarrow.
Right.
They're very closely related. So this one is called Salvia sclera. And when you hear the word sclera, that's the whites of the eyes. And the seeds of the plant are quite mucilaginous. And for years, if somebody had maybe some sawdust, they were downwind of a saw being used, you got a bit of grit in your eye or whatever, and then you end up with your eyes a bit sore or bloodshot even, somebody might soak a few of the seeds, just a tablespoonful of seeds, in some hot water for a little while, and the mucilage would melt into the hot water,
Right.
and you would use that for eye drops, and it would gather up the dust, pollen, or whatever you had irritating your eyes.
Yeah.
So it got to be known as, add a little bit of a Gaelic twist, and it might be, Mrs., could you fix up some of the Clary Sage? The boy's got chips in his eye.
Ah.
So it was clear eye became Clary,
Right.
and so that's where
Yeah,
it got its
yeah.
name, as Clary Sage.
Right.
Now, it's mostly used in our culture currently for a couple of things. It's exceedingly hormonal. And this sort of brings me back to that shift of you can't read a book about herbs and just decide that the essential oil, for example, will work really well, even stronger, because you read it in a herb book.
Right.
Because in some cases, the tincture or an essential oil or a pressed extract or whatever might be completely different compounds.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know?
even in the case of what you just said, you know, like it's those mucilaginous, like moistening, you know, type of qualities in the eyes. The oil doesn't have that.
Well, you're not going to take it or smell it and have it work. Yeah, it's got to be in the eye.
Yeah.
Or things like when we talk about high pressure liquid chromatography and all of these different tests, those only work for something in a liquid state. So you can do HPLCs, or sometimes we just a shorter version, high pressure just HPCs, high pressure liquid chromatography, HPLCs, have nothing to do with testing the concentration of a branched polysaccharide that's coming from echinacea roots.
Right.
That's a fiber
Right.
that does the work by triggering different receptor sites in your intestine. So you can't make an essential oil of echinacea roots
Right.
and have it work for anything.
Yeah.
It's not there, right?
Yeah.
So you always want to pay attention to that. Don't think that because you read it about one type of extract that it's going to work.
Right.
And then we have that, is the right word quadrix?
Quadrix.
Is that, because that's something you're doing, isn't it?
No, that's new to me. I hadn't heard that. Spagyrix.
Spagyrix?
Spagyrix.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where we take a plant, right, and take it apart.
Yes.
And
that's right.
you take one sample and incinerate it to white ash.
Yes.
And that's called the body.
The body.
Am I right?
Yeah, totally.
And so that's where all the minerals are.
Yeah.
And then we might distill it. Which one's called the spirit?
The
It's either
distillation.
Tincture or distilled.
Yeah.
Distilled?
Well, good question, actually. Yeah, because
It's one or the other.
alcohol they call a spirit.
Yeah. So anyway, you make several different types of extraction from the herb and then mix them all together again.
Yeah.
So you have saved all of the healing aspects of a herb
Yeah.
and some of what's on the market, and you're making some of those, I think.
No, actually,
No?
it's an old staff member of mine, Brandon. He's really got into spagyrix, and I'm just doing more conventional tinctures, like
Okay.
dual extracts, and then some of the syrups. I'll add more complexity, but I've never gone as far as burning the plant to an ash
Right.
to add in the body.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, totally fascinating though. I love the concept, and
So back to Clary Sage. There are plants, I think in another episode I was talking about isoprene units and how if two of them hold hands, it's called a monoterpene, and if three of them hold, and
Yeah.
as those carbon-based molecules get bigger and bigger, when you're up to 30 carbons, it's called a triterpene, 40 carbons, it's called a quadriterpene, and triterpenes are also known as hormones, and quadriterpenes are steroids.
right.
So there are plants with hormones and steroids in them, but they would never show up in an essential oil.
Right.
Just quite simply, the molecule's too heavy.
Yeah.
They're too fat to fly. So the good stuff would stay in the cooking vessel,
Right.
and there'd be nothing in the essential oil. Right? So different types of extract affect things differently. So anyway, there is a diterpenoid alcohol in Clary Sage called disclariol, and when I had the lucky chance of at one of these big conferences I was at as one of the presenters, I was sitting right next to Jean Valnet one night and his wife. Some of these people that are famous for, he was very helpful for one of his books because he's a medical doctor working a lot with herbs in his practice, especially essential oils. So he works with oils, and I was studying not aromatherapy books, but medical books
Right.
to learn about a lot of what I used to treat pneumonias and things like that. It wasn't like some of what we do with essential oils is aromatherapy. The smell triggers chemical changes in your endocrine glands and your brain and so forth. So I always like to say some of the most powerful drugs in the world, you don't get at a pharmacy, you don't get them at a herbal store, you don't get them in a high school parking lot. That's always good for a joke. You have to make them yourself.
Yeah.
But some things are stimulants
Right.
so that you make the real drug.
Yeah.
And that's where aromatherapy comes in at times.
Right.
Other things are vibrational. We have all these different ways we use plants for healing, right? So anyway, I was able to ask him with disclariol, because it's a diterpene, 20 carbons, it shouldn't exist. And I asked him, I said, in France, do you have the Batman? And he looked at me and said, Batman? And I said, you know, this, he's in movies and things. He dresses up as a bat. Oh, the Batman! Yes, oui. And the reason I brought that up was because I said, is it possible that disclariol, it's just the shape of the molecule, like a box kite doesn't look like it should fly?
Right.
Is it possible that it's the shape of the molecule that allows it to fly with the steam? Because things have to explode from the plant tissue and go, we can fly. And they go through with the steam, and then they go through the condenser, and they end up in a bucket of water, and they go, oh, but we can't swim. And then they float to the top, right? And then you learn how to suck them off with different apparatuses. So he'd never thought of that. He looked at me and said, oh, this is a good idea. Yeah, So anyway, so it's very much a hormone mimicker. Okay, it's an estrogen lookalike, and that's why it is so famous for helping with PMS and menopause. It's really, really, really at the top of the list for helping in blends of that sort. So we use it in a lot of women's herbs, but also it's even higher in linalyl acetate than lavender. And that's what makes lavender calming. Right? So it's very soothing. And if you've got a man who needs, especially some homophobic dude, he needs to relax, but lavender reminds him of his grandmother too much. And geranium is just too girly. But Clary Sage kind of smells like wet hay. It's woody, it's leafish. It's foresty, and oh, yeah, because all he has to do is breathe it. So if it's one of these, put a few drops on the pillow to sleep better. Anything like that. It's a great oil. I used to love using it in my steam room after a crazy day. You just slow right down and head on the pillow when you're out to sleep in minutes. I had a girlfriend that lived with me for quite a while that was a club waitress, and she'd come home at 2 in the morning or later, all cranked from being in the noisy club. And I would quite often stay up late enough to have a steam with her once she got home. Even when you're a smoker yourself, but especially if you're not, it's horrible to wake up in the morning and just smell that in your hair, in your own hair. So she would often have a steam before coming to bed. So Clary Sage, really good for a lot of things, but it's a good one if you're having one of those, you're at the office and you just gotta have a smoke. One drop of Clary, or you can just sniff the bottle. There's a lot of things where, how much does this cost to use? Depending on how you use it, nothing. Just open the bottle and smell the lid. And you just smell it and put it away. But if you got time to do this, maybe you don't want to do this because you're going to get stuff on your fingers and you got to use your computer. Just open the bottle and smell it. And it's just such an instant. So some people could do that with lavender, but for a lot of the men,
Yeah.
Clary's a better choice.
And what cost-wise? I know like citrus, very cheap to produce, rose, very expensive. Where is it on that spectrum?
Clary's very affordable. It's, I'm going to say, about the same price as lavender.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
Super accessible.
Yep.
Thanks for clarifying that.
What, are you going to write all these down in a book for the next, all these puns?
Yeah, for sure.
He's doing stand-up comedian work now as a Herbal there's going to be a Herbal club where he can do a 90-minute set of all of these little puns and things he's coming up with.
It's a very niche market for sure. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
On to...
It's cold out.
It's cold out. Now, without getting into the long version of the whole vascular system, you have a whole bunch of pipes from head to toe that unless you cut yourself, this stuff called blood goes round and around and around, kind of doing figure eights. Blood leaves your heart and goes out through the aorta, and then smaller and smaller pipes that we call, as in traffic in our cities, we call them major arteries.
Right.
And then we get to smaller ones called arterioles, and then we get to, to the final where your car's parked is a capillary. So we get into smaller and smaller pipes.
Right.
Now, when we look from a helicopter during rush hour, that's heavy traffic. But at any given moment, like right now, most vehicles are parked.
Yeah.
You know, so there's more vehicles parked this morning than there is out on all those arteries.
Yeah.
So we got blood all over the place. So most of your blood right now is in capillaries. And the thing is that all of those pipes, every inch of artery you own is held together by a series of round muscles. Round muscles. And every one of those muscles, we own, I'm going to swear here and say, we own a shitload of wiring. Because every single round muscle of every inch of artery you own is hooked up to the nervous system.
Right.
Okay? And there's the sympha and the parasympha.
Yeah.
And they yell at every single piece of pipe. So what happens is, your heart doesn't work like a sump pump in your boat or in your basement or whatever. It makes one big squeeze, and the aorta has to kind of stretch, and then muscles contract to push that blood a little bit further down the pipe. And as that wave goes down the pipe through the biggest arteries to smaller arterioles, all the way down to the capillary beds, it's a wave moving that you can feel. That's what a pulse is. If I feel my pulse, that was a heartbeat. I'm not sure on the timing here, probably about a minute or so ago, right? So they're all very stretchy.
Yeah.
Arteries are thick and muscular. Veins are thin and bagged out almost like used pantyhose.
Right.
Okay, so on the way home, blood moves really slow, and without enough back pressure, it would be hard to get that blood all the way back to the heart, which sends the blood to the lungs to get reoxygenated, and then it begins again. So blood is kind of doing these figure eight loops in your body, and unless you've cut yourself, it's a closed system. And most people have just never thought of that a pulse is the end result of, and when we look at an EEG with those are the electrical impulses tied with each beat of the heart, right?
Yeah.
And so big pump, big squeeze, little squeeze, smaller squeeze, smaller squeeze. That wave is going through the pipes, right? So the pipes are very, very elastic. And back to the parasympathetic or the autonomic nervous system is just controlling all of that blood flow. So there's been times over the years where if I'm trying to mention to a cardiologist that there's herbs we can use for, like cayenne pepper, for example, can raise blood pressure if it's chronically low, like it's not looked at as a health risk. But if I go to get up right now and I faint and fall over and crack my head on the coffee table, that's not healthy.
No.
Right? So we don't want blood pressure to be too low.
Yeah.
But if it's too high, we have a number of problems.
Yeah.
And all of these things that we do, like low density lipoproteins, the things that cause atherosclerosis, bad cholesterol, things that plaque or coat the pipes, make it harder for them to do their job.
Yeah.
So if we can exercise every inch of artery you own, it's a bit like doing sit-ups or crunches on a slant board. Every time you do a lift, you're building up your abs, which helps support your back, right? So some of the hot herbs like cayenne are making every bit of pipe you own do crunches.
Right.
It tones them to be in their optimal muscular state, so that if they're too sloppy, they firm up, and if they're too tight, they learn to relax. Like after a workout, how do you feel? Great.
Yeah.
During a workout, how do you feel? Pumped.
Yeah.
You know, you're
Right.
pumping it, right?
Yeah.
So you get both effects.
Right.
So the more that we increase our overall blood flow, the more that we're going to get blood to the tissues, the more awake that we're going to be, the more evenly distributed the blood is, and the warmer we're going to be. Now, it's not the same BTU as a furnace, but peppers are rated in BTU.
Right.
It was some British guy came up with this. It's got nothing to do with the BTU of a furnace. It just sounds cute. That so the hottest cayenne comes from around the equator, where they need it. So why do they need hot pepper near the equator? Well, if you look at somebody in Mexico, for example, they might take some corn on the cob, and I've kind of picked up this habit and put on so much cayenne. People look at me and go, "You're going to eat that?" And like, you know, and when you first start, it's going to burn your lips a little bit, and I miss that,
Right.
Because, you know, the more that you use it, it kind of, it's not a big deal anymore. Your lips are just a little bit warm, and it feels good.
Yeah.
You know? But so some really hot peppers, like chilies, are hotter than cayenne. But they're so hot, for me, they don't really have much flavor. So there's one called African redbird that comes from near the equator in Africa.
Yeah.
And it's one of the hottest, measured in BTUs. And it always annoys me where you'll see in a health food store, medicinal cayenne.
Right.
Well, it's all medicinal,
For sure.
but how much?
Yeah.
Right? So I buy a nice organic one that's about 140,000 BTU, and it's got some nice flavor to it. And I'll put that on anything, except desserts probably.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it on a bowl of Cheerios.
Right.
But I mean, I put it on almost everything I eat.
Yeah.
But I buy another one, the Redbird, that's 180,000, and I mix them about 1 to 3,
Right.
so that I'm getting more medicinal action, right?
Yeah.
So that's what helped those. Oh, I didn't talk about frostbite yet. Okay. Anyway, there's a condition. I'll come back to frostbite. There's a condition you can get from repeated frostbite, where there's vascular damage, and that part of your body, whether it's your ears or your feet or your fingertips or whatever, is just cold all the time, and those are called chill blains. That's the medical name for the condition.
Yeah.
Which, when I first heard it, I laughed, because I thought, I've got those, you know. And anyway, we'll come back to that. So I don't like chili that much, even though right now I have 3 kinds of hot sauce in my fridge. I don't really like chili powder that much.
Right.
But I use cayenne on everything because it's got more medicinal action,
Yeah.
you know? Even though I like hot sauces, so you get used to it. But King of all the, so we call circulatory stimulants are things that have this effect on the pipes.
Right.
Okay, they're called circulatory stimulants, different than something that wakes you up.
Yeah.
They're stimulating the action of the muscles on every bit of artery you own. So direct stimulants are ones that go to work on the big pipes first and eventually might make their way to the capillaries.
Right.
Diffusive stimulants head to the capillaries first, and if there's enough dosage, might end up having enough effect on the big arteries.
Right.
Or not.
Okay.
So in my mind, the king of all the stimulants is definitely cayenne pepper. And if you don't like hot things, there's other stimulants like prickly ash is one that isn't hot at all.
Right.
So you can achieve the effect without any heat. But typically, if you first start taking, say, half a teaspoon of cayenne in a little bit of tepid water, what's burning this set of lips might burn the lips at the other end of the tube as well. You know, you might be like, holy smoking a-holes,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, when you're having a dump.
Yeah.
But that effect doesn't usually last more than a couple days, and then your body adjusts. So as far as I'm concerned, cayenne is the king, and his queen I like to think of as a little strawberry blonde girl named Ginger.
Yeah.
All right? So Ginger's action goes straight to the little pipes. So if you're somebody who's always got, when the weather's like this, cold fingers easily or cold toes easily or whatever,
Yeah.
make a habit of ginger tea.
Right.
And or it's because so much, you've heard me condemn drinking cold beverages at mealtime. Part of why ginger is so calming for the tummy is it's bringing warmth
Right.
to the digestive tract and your tummy. So it's really good for digestion. So there's even now, for quite a few years now, we've had Gravol, which used to be something else, but there's now ginger Gravol pills
Oh, really?
that help for nausea,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
for
yeah.
flying and bloating and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So really good for digestion, upset stomachs, but especially good for you going ice fishing today or going to a hockey game or any such thing, winter outdoor activity.
Yeah.
Take a thermos with you of ginger tea,
Right.
or just, you know, make sure you have some before you leave, or that sort of thing. Now, here's the thing. We live in the land of weather. And by definition, weather is climactic change. So I have to be a butthead sometimes and correct people when they say, hey, nice weather we're having, hey, or is this ever horrible weather? Nice weather, if it's been really nice for a week, that's not nice weather, that's no weather.
Right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just nice.
Weather is the change.
It's just nice out. Yeah, weather
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the change.
Right.
So
okay.
we live in weatherland, and I kind of appreciate that. I'm an
Yeah.
outdoorsman and have lots of gear, or had, until this recent experience of mine. Like I used to be strapped to helicopters in the Arctic doing photography for oil companies at temperatures like 40 below,
Jeez.
tied outside an helicopter, and had to keep the cameras warm.
Oh my gosh.
So I've got parkas big enough to not only fit my body, but have a Hasselblad and 2 Nikons underneath as well to keep them warm.
Wow.
That's extreme,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Holy.
No, normal people don't need that.
No.
But for ice fishing or whatever, you want to have some nice warm boots, right? Anyway, when people move here from other places in our country, like say Winnipeg, they learn pretty quickly that if it's really nice in the middle of the summer and you're going to a barbecue that's going to turn into a yard party, you can't just show up in a cotton shirt
Right.
and whatever. You always have a sweater
Yeah.
in the car, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
This is Calgary. So it's a weather town. And it's so easy to have a beautiful morning, whether you're male or female. You walk to work, especially for the ladies, if you're wearing something like a skirt. Or what about headgear? Maybe you don't usually wear hats or whatever. And what was a beautiful day drops to -20 in 4 hours.
Right.
And you don't have the right gear with you at all. And you walk home and you get proper frostbite where there's no feeling anymore. And in extreme frostbite, the tissues actually, if it's been frozen, it's dead.
Right.
And within a matter of hours, it's black.
Yeah.
Or at least a really dark purple.
Yeah.
And I've suffered that with my feet.
So I've only ever experienced frostbite where it gets like white, so that's the stage before, right? Obviously, I've never gone to the point of, truly dead tissue where it turns purple or black.
Well, but that comes after the white phase.
Yeah.
When you warm up.
To me, I feel that's almost like a frost kiss, in that sense.
A nip.
A nip, yeah.
So what's critical if you've gotten a nip?
Yeah.
What have a wee nip, right? If you've gotten a nip, whether it's your whole feet, especially the ears, you must not re-expose yourself to that condition, to that environment.
Right.
So call a cab, catch a ride, do something different, go straight to a store and buy a toque or something.
Yeah.
But you can't re-expose that tissue because the second time around, once the nip's been there, you have done vascular damage and re-exposure is going to be 10 times worse, that much faster. So if you've gotten frostbite, you're going to have to be really careful for the whole rest of the winter.
Right.
And probably even the following winter.
Yeah.
And it can take a few years to fully recover that damage.
Right.
But taking circulatory stimulants regularly will help you rebuild the vascular system.
Oh, amazing. One thing I learned from our mutual friend Yarrow Willard was, and he probably learned it from his father Terry, was the idea that ginger as a circulatory system is great in formulas because it helps get the herbs deeper into the system through the action you're describing.
Yeah, better absorption.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, and that's why, if one or the other, if we go to a store, your store right now, and look at 10 different formulas for just about anything, virtually all of them will have a circulatory stimulant in them, just for that reason.
Yeah.
To improve the absorption of all the other herbs.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you subscribe much difference between fresh ginger and dried ginger at all, and having different actions, or same?
Well, I just love fresh ginger. You've got the, the smell is just so heartwarming, and once you get hooked on it, it makes you smile.
Yeah.
But
do you know they're actually growing fresh ginger in Alberta now? Yeah, we've got a supplier. They're growing fresh ginger. In greenhouses, obviously, but year-round, when we need ginger in the kitchen, we'll order it fresh. Comes from southern Alberta, and fresh turmeric.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've had turmeric as a houseplant, so that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, cool.
I never bought it by choice. Somebody gave it to me, and it was very healthy in my pond room. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. We have a wild ginger that is a real ginger. The Calgary area is too cold for it.
Right.
But as soon as you get around Revelstoke,
yeah,
you'll find it in the woods.
Yeah.
And it's quite common as we get into BC interior. I've run into it numerous times on the island for sure.
Yeah.
Just out on hikes. And if you're not on a trail, if you're walking in the woods, you'll know the instant you stepped on some.
Right.
Because you just get that ginger burst in the air, and you're like, whoa, yay. And you kind of, stop and look around and find out that there's mats of it because it
do you know, was there any evidence of that being traded at all? Did they recognize how valuable that particular herb was, as a circulatory stimulant? Because like you mentioned, okay, here in the plains, we don't have it. It gets too cold. Oh, I'm curious. I've never come across that. I wonder if it was traded in that way.
I don't understand what you're asking.
Oh, so for instance, like, the peoples in BC where ginger grew.
Oh, I
collecting
see.
it, drying it.
Different tribes.
Yeah. Would they trade it with the plains people who didn't have the...
No idea. I wasn't there.
No.
Or if I was, it was a lifetime that I have no distinct memory of.
You've forgotten, yeah. Yeah.
I remember years ago, and it was so funny, it was the moment, I had been emceeing one of our, well, backing up just a short bit, a group of us that were all instructors with Parks and Rec with the city. It was everything from yoga to whatever.
Yeah.
And I was involved as a herbalist and with essential oils. And a bunch of us were saying, how do we make our audience bigger? If we try and have a conference, we tend to be teaching to each other.
Right.
How do we make this bigger? And we decided to have a natural healing conference, whatever we called it. And we had a really good run. It started primarily as educational.
Right.
But a lot of it had booths to promote our practices, or some of us had things to sell. But it ended up slowly becoming more commercial, less education.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we began it, if you did a talk, you were paid as an instructor.
Right.
At the end of it, to take the stage to promote your product, you had to pay the people running it. Like the whole thing just turned around.
Yeah.
And that's when I bowed out.
Yeah.
But at one of the events when we were doing the closing ceremony, we'd hired Doreen Spence,
Okay.
who was a tribal elder in several different countries in the world. She would go to New Zealand and all over the place. And I think that work is why she was awarded a Nobel Prize at some point years ago. Anyway, so she was up there with her eagle wing smudging and doing the closing prayer. And we had just had One World Drums had done a big hoopla, and we were doing this whole wrap up. And I went up to thank Doreen, and as I approached her, I said, Doreen, I have no native in my blood this time around, but I have much in my heart.
Right.
And she's just such a humble little being. It was so nice just last week. I hooked up with her on Facebook.
Oh, cool.
Like, she's still around.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And,
I was just thinking, because I haven't seen her in a couple of years. She hasn't been in the
she's and she's just always been so humble.
Yeah.
Like she'll kind of tilt her head and do this little old me sort of thing.
Yeah.
And anyway, I came up to her and I said, Doreen, I have no native in my blood this time around, but I have much in my heart. And she tilted her head and said, well, you're all a little red on the inside. And I was laughing and crying at the same time.
Right, yeah.
I think that's what women call happy tears.
Right, yeah,
And a huge hug.
Yeah.
And she just became my adoptive grandmother that moment.
Oh, amazing.
And we've been good friends ever since. And she often honored me if there was some, it's not Indigenous to say big shot, but some chief or whatever in town.
Yeah.
And they'd forgot or ran out of, and they didn't have any sweetgrass braids or other smudge. She would always come to me for supplies.
Right.
Because she knew I did it right.
Yeah.
That I honored the plants and all of that.
Cool.
And that was very honoring for me that I was her go-to guy for supplies.
Well, we should have a little event with you and her. Get you guys together, and hopefully you'll connect with her personally anyways, beyond Facebook.
Yeah, and another gal that I hadn't seen for quite a while is, I met her initially as a student. Also Cree is a gal. Her white name is Leah Bill. Her Indigenous name was Rippling Water Woman. And usually your name came from the first thing your mother saw or thought of when you were born.
Really?
Like if her name was Crazy Horse, there must have been horse outside the teepee that just got into too much loco weed, you know.
Yeah.
So her name was Rippling Water Woman, and I hadn't seen her for quite a while. Another one was a gal named Yvonne Jobin,
Oh, yeah.
and she's the one that I made my native drum with.
Yeah, I know
So
Yvonne.
I've been her teacher, she's been my teacher.
Yeah.
And she invited me over for lunch a couple of weeks back. That's when I got into some moose for lunch.
Okay, excellent.
And yes, it's been very heartwarming for me to be running back into some of my Indigenous friends.
Yeah, nice.
So I'm not 100% certain about such things as reincarnation. I have my beliefs, but they could be shifted. You know, I'm a little bit, what's the word for that? Agnostic. I
Right.
think that's the right word.
Yeah.
When you rather believe something, but you could be persuaded.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise.
Yeah, it's a nice thought, you know.
I rather believe in reincarnation. I've never been one to think that if you're a bad person, you'll get reincarnated as a snake or something like that.
Right.
I've never gone that far.
I mean, that's a principle of karma taken, you know, to its extreme. in that
Yeah,
sense.
other than if you were a really bad person, you'll be reborn and become a weatherman in Alberta. Because nobody will ever believe you,
Yeah.
even your own family.
That's right. Always wrong.
Nobody will trust you ever. That's as far as I go with that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
But, yeah. Well, you're all a little red on the inside, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I love. Yeah, I don't know if it was his phrase specifically, but Yarrow's kind of idea of like, you know, there's the First Nation, you know, and he aspires to be a second nation, you know, like, you know, we can never be First Nations, but here we are, we're on this land. How can we live as Indigenous as possible? You know, Indigenous, the definition being to be of a place, right? And we can be the second nation.
Well, they weren't always here either.
Right. Yeah.
They came
We've all came from
from
somewhere.
somewhere else,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I think more important is, you know, the spirit, you know, in the ways one lives one life. So, and Doreen shared that with you, right? Like, your heart's in the right place.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing things right. Yeah, less about your race or your genetics or origin, that type of thing. Yeah. Cool. Well, what a great chat we had this morning. Covered a lot of ground here. And so I'm just going to kind of park some thoughts for next time. We don't have time to go into them today, but pulse diagnosis, that came up in my thoughts. That might be a curious thing to talk about.
Okay.
And then what was the other thing? I don't know. It'll come to me. But yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things that are done in Chinese medicine. I've never trained in pulse diagnosis.
Right.
A little bit tongue.
Yeah.
Something that was done a lot by our Indigenous people was the sclera, the whites of the eyes.
Right.
It's like one more type of iridology.
Yeah.
There's, just on that note, if you hear these words for newcomers, iridology is where we study the patterns in your irises. And a lot of it has to do with your genetics. And I always like to say, with iridology, because I believe in it fully, it's a little bit like telling us what sort of vehicle you're driving.
Right.
So this is a physical vehicle that my soul rides around in.
Yeah.
Sort of ish, right?
Yeah.
And a bit about how you've been taking care of it.
Right.
So you might have been born with a Mercedes,
Yeah.
but if you drive it through stubble fields and rocky beaches, it's not going to last you very long.
No.
Or you might have been born with a used Chevette with 100,000 miles on it already, but if you pamper your car,
For sure.
you might outlive the Mercedes kind
Yeah.
of thing. So there's that element.
Yeah.
But then there's another way we look at some of the same patterns, a different set of maps called RAID. And that tells us more about who you are as the driver,
Right.
which is a really big issue with health. So
Yeah.
it gets us into the emotional plane.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And then there's
and then the
sclerology.
sclerology.
Yeah.
And sclerology ties in quite a bit, supporting some of the same patterns as iridology,
Right.
where if there's a little blood vessel pointing at your liver mark, that's the same liver area that's in iridology.
Yeah.
So they're quite related. I had just minimal training in sclerology. By the time that was circulating, I wasn't practicing much anymore.
Yeah. But yeah,
So,
come across it enough to understand the concept anyways.
but I would bet any amount of money that if I took the time with a chart to draw my perception of your colon, for example, we could take you straight to a lab and have one of those drink the chalk,
Yeah.
and have what do we call that one?
Yeah, the barium.
Barium.
Yeah. And then the X-ray and
A barium X-ray.
yeah.
I would put any amount of money that they would be exactly the same.
Yeah, totally.
So I've often questioned in today's world how successful we're going to be with using you see it in the movies, iris prints for
Oh yeah.
for
yeah.
ID.
Yeah, like
iris scanners.
Yeah.
And then we've got
'Cause unlike your fingerprint, it can change.
yeah. Well, even there must be some allowance for change. Like if you had a whole hand scanner, what if I had a really bad cut and had some scar tissue
Yeah.
or
Or you burn.
burnt one of my fingertips?
Yeah.
So is there a certain allowance?
Right.
I don't know these things.
Yeah.
But because I've seen with clients, even having taken photographs of irises changing quite a lot with dietary changes
Yeah,
or
totally.
herbal use or whatever.
Yeah.
Even eye color.
Yeah.
I remember one day looking up an old girlfriend in Saskatchewan that I hadn't seen for a few years, and I must have been in full sun at the doorway. I rang her doorbell, and she came to the door and just went, where'd your big brown eyes go?
Right.
And I had no idea what she was talking about because my eyes were mostly green.
Ah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, just only two. Is it two true eye colors?
In pigment, we've got blue is real, and I think it's green that with blue can become the brown color.
Right. Yeah.
And then because strands of them will hold together.
Right.
And with a good lens, you can see all that.
Yeah. Totally. Cool. Well, that'd be great. Love to get deeper into that conversation. So keep joining us every week as we have these conversations. Yeah, we've got a lot to cover. Wild wisdom and storytelling. We've got a lifetime here.
We hope you learned something. I learn something every time we do this.
Yeah, totally.
And I owe most of what I know to challenging students that were always asking questions that forced me into digging to come up with the answer.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, rather than just saying, oh, I don't know that.
Yeah.
And I think some people, it's a character thing. Some people would say, oh, I don't think so, or whatever, that no, that's wrong, or whatever. I have always, if I don't have an answer, I want to find one.
Right.
And it's just, that's in my character.
Yeah.
And I would commence digging. So I probably wouldn't know half as much as I do if it wasn't for solving real people's problems as client patients and answering queries from students.
Yeah.
Over the years.
Not to mention that whole adage, if you really want to learn something, teach it, because you have to assimilate that knowledge enough that you can teach it. Yeah. Cool. All right, well, thanks everybody tuning in. Always a pleasure. You know,
Keep those toes warm.
Yeah, for sure.
Have some ginger tea.
Yeah, get the cayenne in the diet.
It's I have in the home that I live in now, I can't have anything sharp or anything hot in my room, so I can't even have a kettle or a microwave or whatever. But in weather like this, I had bought when I was doing classes in my own home, I had bought one of those little two burner warmers that you would see with the round pots in a truck stop or wherever to keep coffee warm.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a really bad idea for coffee. It turns coffee from being a really good antioxidant into something evil. I forget the acids that form, but having coffee sit around like that is just not a good idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I would do that with things like ginger tea.
Yeah.
So I would put fresh chopped ginger into one of those pots in cold water before I went to bed at night.
Yeah.
And then first thing in the morning, there'd be some, it would slowly steep overnight. And that would just stay on for weeks in weather like this.
Yeah.
And anybody, clients or friends dropping by, if they felt in the mood, they always knew there was some tea on.
Yeah.
I had a double one going, and if I threw a handful of aniseed into it, then it might be a bit licoricey this morning.
Yeah.
Or some clove buds to spice it up more. It would keep changing. Things like yarrow taste god-awful.
Right.
So if you're going to make some yarrow tea, I would make that by itself first.
Right.
With the herb, and then strain all the herb off just to get rid of it so you wouldn't get any in your cup, and then add things like clove or whatever to it so it tasted better and worked better.
Yeah.
There would just always be one, usually two teas on the go, and in weather like this, they always had ginger in them.
Yeah. Nice.
But, and just, I'll shut up after this. I don't understand how this got to be a practice, because I know several people that they call it ginger tea, and they put ginger on the stove and boil it. Because most of ginger's best chemistry are the volatile oils. Right. And as soon as you're boiling it, the best stuff is flying away.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's left sort of tastes like ginger, but you want to bring it just short of a simmer.
Yeah. And lid on.
And put a lid on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, put a lid on it, Blaine. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give us a like, share this with someone you know who would benefit, and subscribe so you're up to date with all the new episodes coming out. You can shop online at lightcellar.ca, as well as visit us in the heart of Bowness in Calgary, Alberta.